General Hodges, greetings. Great to see you on First Western. Thank you for being with us again.
Thank you very much for the privilege.
So it's the Independence Day of Ukraine. In your opinion, what does Ukraine's independence mean personally for you?
Well, I've met so many wonderful women and men from Ukraine, soldiers, members of the Rada, business people, academics, and knowing that the struggle that they are enduring now is really an inspiration for other people that where we take our independence maybe for granted.
In your opinion, what does Ukraine's independence influence the world's global order?
Well, if Ukraine is not successful, if the world stands by and Russia is allowed to continue to violate Ukrainian independence, then I think it sends a terrible message to others about our willingness to defend our values. When we talk about sovereignty and human rights and international law, if we're not willing to do what it takes to defend that, I think Russia is rewarded. China sees that, and other would-be authoritarian governments see that as well. So Ukrainian success in achieving full independence of all of its territory is an important step for this global order.
Let's cover also situation on the ground. How could you assess current progress of Ukraine's counteroffensive operation?
Well, of course, it's very difficult. It's probably going slower than some people would want, but it's still, in my view, early days. I mean, if you think about the U.S. or the Allied invasion of Normandy in June of 1944, after the Allies landed with all the advantages, including air superiority, it was 2 months before they were finally able to break out of the German defenses and the hedgerows there in Normandy and start moving across France. That was 2 months after years of preparation. They had to learn, they had to innovate. And so that's how I think about what Ukraine is doing. Russia did not waste the time that we gave them as we argued over whether or not to provide tanks and other things like that. And so Ukrainian soldiers are adapting or learning. I have great faith in the Ukrainian general staff. And of course, we don't know everything. We shouldn't know everything. I think also on the Russian side, I think that they are fragile. I think their logistics are getting pounded. Their artillery is getting pounded by Ukrainians. And I think in a few weeks, I don't want to put a date on it because I've been wrong before on my estimates. But I think we're going to see a much improved picture in a few weeks as Ukrainian soldiers figure out how to get through these Russian defenses, and as the continued effort to reduce and degrade Russian logistics continues.
You mentioned about the D-Day, Normandy, but didn't on that days US allies have more weapons and more capabilities than rather than Ukrainian army today?
Of course, the two biggest advantages that the Allies had were air superiority. I mean, enormous air power compared to what the Germans had. So that was one gigantic advantage. And the other was, of course, a huge fleet that was right there in the channel that was able to provide support as well. And so these, of course, are things that the Ukrainian armed forces don't have. And so we have got to figure out a way to compensate with more long-range precision weapons, for example.
Is it even possible to conduct such operation as it was during the Normandy to liberate Crimea?
It's possible, but it's going to be more expensive and costly than it should be. And again, this is, in my view, this is the fault of the U.S. administration, which has done so much good otherwise. I mean, incredible amount of support, keeping 50 nations together. So that's not something that we could ignore. but the administration has stopped short of saying we want Ukraine to win. If they say that, then I think all the things that Ukraine needs would become available. So for me, this is the key, is that the administration has to decide they want Ukraine to actually win this war.
Although the New York Times reports that Ukraine has achieved tactical successes on the ground, could such tactical successes lead to the strategic one?
Well, that's what we have to hope. But, there's a lot of fighting going on in a lot of different places. There's still a lot of fighting that has to take place. I anticipate that General Zaluzhny and his staff have looked at different options for how to confuse the Russians, to deceive the Russians as to where the main effort will be. And I really am impressed with what they're doing with drones, both in the air and at sea, to put pressure on the Russian Navy, to put pressure on Russia's logistics infrastructure, the bridges, for example. This is all an important part of it. And that all of these things are going on at the same time, I think improves or increases the chances that Ukraine will achieve a breakthrough at some point. Look, I don't think any Russian soldiers want to be there. I think that as the constant pounding takes place, the logistics continue to be disrupted. Eventually, Ukraine is going to create that gap, and then I think they're going to be able to exploit that. But it's still going to take time.
Also, the New York Times reports that Ukraine has changed its tactics on the ground. What does it mean, and could it really make a difference?
Well, I don't know exactly what the New York Times is talking about, but I think some of the journalists who have been watching this, and these are journalists, a lot of them are good ones that are there on the ground watching the fighting themselves, but they had expectations, and then when it doesn't turn out exactly as they expected, they assume that the Ukrainians have changed something. I think the Ukrainian soldiers are famous, as good as any in the world, of any country, at adapting and innovating based on what they see in front of them. And so I think when it became clear you can't just drive through a minefield, or that the Russian defenses maybe were thicker and tougher than we had anticipated, and we had not given Ukraine enough equipment to help get through these minefields, then Ukrainian soldiers do what they do best, which is adapt and innovate and come up with different ways of doing things. And I think that's what's going on.
US media also reports that minefields are slowing down Ukraine's advances. If you were a Ukrainian general, how would you overcome this challenge on the ground?
Well, I think what the Ukrainian general staff is doing now is the right thing. Of course, clearing a path through minefields is extremely dangerous and difficult, but it's even worse if you're getting hit with artillery while you're trying to do it. And so the Ukrainian approach seems to be to go after Russian artillery, to degrade it, both by destroying the actual artillery, but also destroying the logistics, the ammunition necessary for the artillery. And I think continuously doing that, and also making it difficult for Russia to reposition troops from one area to another area, also helps to give time and take pressure off of the Russian or the Ukrainian engineers who were trying to create a gap through these minefields. So I think, given all the things that they have, I think they're doing the best they can with what they have.
In your opinion, how long could Russian army sustain Ukraine's counteroffensive operation and Ukraine's long-range missile strikes?
Yeah, this is a great question. I don't know. I've never known for sure what how long Russia can do what they're doing. Clearly, they have sustained a lot of casualties. Clearly, they have lost thousands of pieces of equipment. Their Air Force doesn't want to go anywhere near Ukrainian airspace. The Navy doesn't want to go anywhere near Ukrainian coastline. So, and we know that sanctions have had an effect, that Russia's ability to produce rockets and missiles and ammunition is less than it was a year ago, but they can still produce. So my assumption is that they will keep doing this as long as Vladimir Putin believes he can win. When he decides he can no longer win, then it's over. So the target is really inside his mind. When he realizes that there's no way that Ukraine is going to stop, when he realizes that there's no way the West is going to stop supporting Ukraine, when he realizes that he is going to lose Crimea, then I think he changes the narrative, and it's over. But as long as he thinks that he can hold out, and of course he doesn't care how many of his own soldiers are killed. I mean, that doesn't matter to him, and apparently it doesn't matter too much to Russian people. As long as he thinks he still can win, then I think this will go on.
What if he realizes that he cannot win? What would he do exactly?
Of course, that's what we all would like to know. I think, my view, Crimea is the most important piece of territory still remaining, that this is what we would call decisive. When Ukraine liberates Crimea, when the Russians have been forced to leave, when it becomes too dangerous for the Black Sea Fleet to stay there, for the Air Force to operate from there, for the big logistics hub at Zhenkoy, when they've lost Crimea, then I think it's going to be over. I don't think that the Russians really care that much about Donbass, except that it provides the land bridge to Crimea. So if Ukraine makes Crimea untenable, so dangerous that the Russians have to reposition the fleet out of there, for example, then I think the end will be in sight. What does Vladimir Putin do? Well, he of course he can do what he always does, which is change the narrative to suit what he wants. I think that his number one priority is not Crimea. His number one priority is staying alive and staying in power. So he'll do whatever it takes to stay in power. I don't accept the argument that if he thinks he's going to lose Crimea, that he automatically uses a nuclear weapon. I think that the Russians know that there are zero good outcomes for them if they use a nuclear weapon. I mean, I think they know that. I think the Chinese have told them, do not do this. My president has said there will be catastrophic consequences for Russia if they use a nuclear weapon. So, and the Ukrainians, of course, have said they won't stop just because Russia might use a tactical nuclear weapon. And so I think the Russians know that their nuclear weapons are really most effective when they don't use them, because they see that we stop, that we deter ourselves. So I don't think that the loss of Crimea automatically means nuclear weapon, or that the regime falls. That will be up to Putin and the people around him. When they finally get tired of what he has done to their country, not just the hundreds of thousands of people killed, but also their economy. I mean, the value of the ruble now is a joke around the world. The oligarchs can't go anywhere. Their family can't go anywhere. I mean, a lot of people have lost a lot. And I think they don't see it getting any better.
But if Putin loses Crimea, could he just regroup his troops and prepare to the next invasion of Ukraine?
Of course, that would always be a possibility. But without Crimea, it will be much, much more difficult for the Russians to do that. And in the meanwhile, of course, Ukraine We'll have learned a lot. We'll have the best army in Europe, and we'll continue to get support from the U.S. and other countries. And so I think Russia will be much less capable and anxious to attack Ukraine again, assuming that Ukraine does everything it should do to make itself strong, both internally as well as externally, and then Europe begins to help with rebuilding, so that the millions of Ukrainian refugees can have a place to come home. So I think the defeat of Russia, I mean, a real defeat, ejecting them from Ukrainian territory, will change the Russian thinking, I think, for a very long time.
In your opinion, what is the best case scenario for the Ukraine's counteroffensive operation for the upcoming months?
Well, what I believe that the operational priority is to cause the Russian forces to leave Crimea. That I think is the most important thing that has to be done. In order to do that, of course, Ukraine needs more long-range capabilities that could hit all the airfields and in the seaport of Sevastopol, for example. But that also means they've got to get closer to the land bridge. So more progress that would enable them to bring up more HIMARS, for example, other weapon systems that could reach the road between Mariupol and Melitopol and Crimea to stop the logistics movement there. I think these are the kind of things that they're going to continue to do. I don't know exactly where the best place is, but the general staff knows where the best place or places will be to do that.
Also, there has been one statement from the NATO officials that Ukraine could trade its land in exchange of NATO membership. What do you think about this statement, and is this opinion popular among European and Western officials?
This was interesting. This came from the chief of staff of Secretary General Stoltenberg. So he's not an official spokesman for NATO. Frankly, I was surprised he said it. I think it's a terrible idea. Ukraine will never be safe or secure with Russia controlling Crimea. Russia has never lived up to any agreement. And, the thinking behind this kind of idea is really flawed, because who are we to suggest that Ukraine should give up some of its territory? I mean, nobody would ask Germany to give up Schleswig-Holstein or North Rhine-Westphalia, or would ask the United States to give up Texas just for the sake of peace. So I really am surprised and not pleased that somebody like the Secretary General's chief of staff would make a comment like this. Now, I know a lot of people, of course, are looking for ways, thinking of possibilities, but at the end of the day, with Russia occupying Crimea, I don't see how Ukraine is ever safe, nor can it rebuild its economy. I mean, Crimea blocks Azov Sea. And so even after Mariupol and Verdansk are liberated, they'll never be able to become viable seaports again. And Kherson and Mykolaiv and Odessa all are easily disrupted by the Russian Navy and Russian Air Force sitting in Crimea. So I see no goodness in it. I think Ukraine is going to absolutely win this war. And now is not the right time to give the Russians hope that we are getting tired or weak.
I would like also to cover U.S. public support for Ukraine. CNN reports that U.S. public support for providing Ukraine with additional aid among Republican voters is weakening. What is the reason for this issue?
Well, um, first I would say, I've also seen polls that show support is very strong. Ultimately, it's the job of the president to explain to American people why this matters. It's the president's job to say we are going to help Ukraine, not for as long as it takes, but we're going to help Ukraine to win. And it's in the interest of the United States and our allies that Ukraine is successful because of the importance of peace and stability in Europe, which is necessary for prosperity in Europe, which is necessary for American prosperity. And also to explain to the American people that the Chinese are watching. And if the Chinese see that we're not willing to do everything that's necessary, then I think that raises the chances of China making a terrible miscalculation about what they might do with Taiwan, for example. So the president has to make the case, and he hasn't done that enough yet. And I think he's going to have to pick that up because he's got a good story to tell of what his administration has done, but he's got to tell that story.
Also, former National Security Advisor, Ambassador John Bolton, says that President Biden's timid approach to the aid for Ukraine has fractured the U.S. public support for Ukraine. Do you support such point?
I would agree with Mr. Bolton that the president's approach has been timid and too incremental, but that's not what fractured support. It's the support has to be sustained. So it's the lack of a strong, clear message of why this is important. That's what allows the support to dissipate or weaken.
Also, I'd like to cover situation in Russia. How could you assess the sustainability of Putin's regime after Yevgeny Prigozhin's mutiny?
Well, I think it revealed several things. First of all, it made it clear to everybody that watches how all of these guys hate each other. I mean, there is no cohesion amongst the various leaders between the army, the mercenaries, the ministries, the Kremlin. I mean, they literally hate each other. And traditionally, I know the army has always hated mercenaries. The army hates the Chechens. The Army, Navy, and Air Force hate each other. So this is a good thing for Ukraine, that on that side, the leadership is so fractured and that they still do not have one joint operational commander, which means that they don't have a clear, unified joint effort. So you don't have the Navy and the Air Force and the Army all working for and with each other. That's a good thing for Ukraine. I think that the story of Prigozhin also has revealed that Putin is really weak. I mean, when I hear people talk about, oh, we don't want to put him in a corner because he might do something, we saw what he does when he was put in a corner.
Also, The Times reported that after a Moscow drone attack on Kremlin, Russian President Putin had ordered to directly strike Ukrainian government buildings in the city center of Kyiv with hypersonic missiles Kinjal, but they failed because US made Patriot systems intercepted such missiles. Don't you think that it is the best sign of Putin's desperation?
Well, I think they're showing that they have no other options. I mean, there's nothing else they can do. They're trying to hang on to the Ukrainian territory that they've illegally taken. They have no real option to launch a new counteroffensive, not with real capability anywhere. They're launching missiles at apartment buildings and schools and hospitals, fixed targets. There's just not much else they can do, and so there is a desperation, and they want to hang on and hope that we, the West, will lose the will to keep doing this. I think that the Russian side is fragile. I mean, there's still a lot of hard fighting to go, and they still have a lot of capability to defend. But I think below the surface, there's a fragility in the command structure, in the popular support, in the logistics. And if we can help Ukraine with capability that could really push, I think I can see that this whole thing collapses. But we, the West, have got to decide we want this to happen. We want Ukraine to be successful, to win, not just get a better negotiating position, but to actually win and provide long-range precision capability like ATACMS, like Taurus, weapons that would really go a long way to make Crimea untenable.
Thank you, General Hodges, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Daniel, thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity that you give me, and I'm so proud of Ukraine and the example Ukrainians are setting for fighting for their independence.